Welcome back to State of Belief Radio, everyone. I'm Welton Gaddy. Auschwitz. That one word, perhaps more than any other, has come to evoke the collective horror of the Nazi death machine that so effectively perpetuated the Holocaust. Today, the site draws over 1 million visitors a year. With the 70th anniversary of the Allied liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau just days ago, I want to look at how we're to continue ensuring never again, even as the last survivors reach their last years. And just as importantly, how we renew and make us relevant as possible the lessons of history for future generations. So I'm very pleased to welcome Shana Penn, Executive Director of the Toby Foundation for Jewish Life and Culture, to State of Belief Radio. Shana, welcome.
Thank you so much, Welton. I'm delighted to be here.
I'd like for you, please, to start by talking about the events around the observance of the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz.
So to say something about the events surrounding the 70th anniversary, this is a very big anniversary year. I think the organizers of the event, which is the Polish government and the State Museum of Auschwitz, and the many international Jewish organizations and human rights organizations that help to organize and bring people in to attend the ceremonies, we're all very aware that this may very well be the last time that survivors of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Jewish survivors, the Polish political prisoners, Roma, Sinti, Gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet political prisoners, etc. This may be the last time that they would be able to attend the ceremony such as this.
Mm-hmm.
It was very moving.
With these survivors and descendants in mind, in your estimation, what was the most important parts of the remembrance?
Well, the remembrance this year was very, it really honored the victims of Auschwitz-Birkenau in a way that was not done in previous major anniversary events. So this is the Polish government is in charge of really organizing the program, and this year the primacy of the victims, that was the heart of the program. I thought it was fortunate that we could watch this around the world. It was streamed live via Google, or thanks to Google, and what you saw was after the Polish president spoke, the next speakers were Holocaust survivors, and then a Polish political prisoner. A lot of people don't know that the most people killed at Auschwitz-Birkenau were Jewish, 92% of those killed, and the second largest number of people killed were Polish political prisoners. In fact, the Auschwitz site originally was established by the Nazis to house, to take in and incarcerate Polish political prisoners beginning in 1940. It turned into a death camp for Jews 2 years later in March 1942. So recognizing as many of the various victim groups who were at Auschwitz-Birkenau is very important, and this was done really appropriately this year.
Shana, was there an especially compelling moment that touched you that you could share with us?
One compelling moment for me was when Roman Kent spoke. Roman Kent was a Polish Jew from the city of Łódź, which was had the second largest Jewish community up to World War II, and it had the longest-running ghetto, the Łódź ghetto. Roman Kent went on in his life he dedicated his life to Holocaust remembrance. He is one of the chairs of the International Claims Conference that today helps to determine ways to preserve Holocaust sites throughout Europe and the former Soviet Union, and to provide funding, international funding for those preservation projects. So he's a VIP, but he spoke as a survivor at the event, and he had tears in his eyes, which brought tears to everyone else's eyes, as he said, "My father told me when we were in Auschwitz together, he said to me in 3 languages, remember, you must remember, zachor, that's how you say it in Hebrew, pamiętaj, that's how you say it in Polish. And that's what we are here to do. We are here to remember, and we are also here to defend democracy and human rights against any kind of intolerance and prejudice and racism that is happening in the world today." So he, as a survivor, was compelling because he linked his own past and the Holocaust past to the needs of the present day.
Shana, you were at the 50th anniversary commemoration in 1995. So much.
I was at the 50th anniversary commemoration, and you're really aging me now. Well.
I'm sorry. Well, we can maybe if we can pay off the producer and blip that.
No, I'm teasing you. I'm totally teasing you.
No, I know that.
Okay.
But so much has changed in the world since then, and I'd like you to just reflect on the contrast between then and now, and are there any lessons to be learned in those contrasts?
This is a very good question about what the differences are between then and now. One difference is, and I'm glad you're asked because I have been reflecting about this recently. One big difference is 1995, which marked the 50th anniversary commemoration, was only 6 years after the Cold War. So we were all very much in a post-Cold War era. And there were new democracies being formed in Eastern Europe, including in Poland, which at the time was headed by President Lech Wałęsa. And if you remember, Wałęsa won the Nobel Peace Prize for his leadership over the Solidarity Revolution in Poland back in August 1980. So he was considered a democracy champion. But he had a very difficult time as president of a new nation that had not yet wrestled with its Holocaust history in the way that West European countries had. Poland was no different from other East European countries coming out of communism that only had about 6 years to start to grapple with what their complex and multiple roles were during World War II and in the Holocaust. And as a result, he performed actually a very disappointing, to say the least, and rather disgraceful role as the political leader presiding over this ceremony. He did not recognize the primacy of Holocaust memory, of Jewish memory at the site, until the international human rights community protested. And he did not allow the Jewish mourning prayer, the Kaddish, to be recited at the official ceremony. So his fellow Nobel Peace Prize recipient, Elie Wiesel, led a separate ceremony at Birkenau, which was the second large camp at Auschwitz, and this was where the Jews and the Gypsies were sent to be murdered in the gas chambers and then burned in the crematoria. So Wiesel held a separate alternative ceremony. And he also expressed his disappointment, and he said for the world to hear, while not all victims of Auschwitz-Birkenau were Jews, all Jews were victims.
Gosh, what a powerful thing.
Yeah, and then he met with Wałęsa and helped Wałęsa to take a more appropriate position at the remainder of the ceremonies. So there you have a big difference just in the ceremony alone and its reflection about Poland and how Poland has now become a democracy. Because under communism, the Polish Communist Party denied and repressed Holocaust memory and all European memory at Auschwitz. They only focused on Polish memory. Poles were Poland, the national martyr that suffered the most in the Holocaust. Well, it's true that at Auschwitz, where there were 75,000 Polish political prisoners were killed, it was the largest number of Poles killed in one place anywhere during the war.
Mm-hmm.
So it is an important site of Polish suffering, but it's a site that has to be shared among all the victim groups. Under communism, that wasn't done. And by 1995, Poland was still coming out of it was still thawing from having been frozen, its memory frozen under communism, and the Cold War was cold. And it took maybe a decade for the country to start to reckon with its Holocaust past. So this was not a positive moment in recent Polish history, this commemoration. And so you see a big change just for Poland alone in terms of its political development and maturity over the last 20 years. Now it's in the EU. Not only is it a member of the EU, but its former Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, is now the president of the European Commission. In terms of the global reality, we are in a very different time frame than we were back in 1995. 1995, we were still celebrating the end of the Cold War, the extension of democracy across new geopolitical borders, a pan-European identity. Countries were reaching out to one another. Democratization was, and human rights were the buzzwords of the time. And since then, we have been facing genocide, ethnic conflict, and terrorism, and that has come to dominate the frightening and devastating and negative events in our world today. We thought we were, in 1995, we might have thought we were finished with having such tragedies. Now we're realizing that these tragedies have taken new formations. And as such, I think one of the things that was also moving at this ceremony this week was that people were referencing the recent terrorism attacks in France and in other places in Europe, and making associations with the Holocaust, with Holocaust memory, not in an exploitative way, but to say what it really, one of its key values today, which is that it serves as a moral compass in a post-Cold War era. It's a moral touchstone in our contemporary world search for unity and shared values to address wars and ethnic conflicts and terrorism and instability and all the uncertainties that we're dealing with right now.
Well, that's very helpful. I want to be even more narrowly focused for just a moment before we get off. In recent years, words like Nazi and Holocaust have been used again and again in completely inappropriate and irresponsible ways to try to score political points in the United States particularly. At the same time, we see a movement in parts of Europe to marginalize and demonize vulnerable groups, including but not limited to Jewish people. How can we combat these words losing their historical power while at the same time recognizing that we're never fully safe from the ugliest impulses of humankind?
Well, I would say, and I'm going to quote Professor Jonathan Weber, a British historian who is also a member of the International Auschwitz State Council, because in a recent conversation with him, I learned how much they are grappling with these very questions. And the keys are education and remembrance. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, for example, do you know that most of the visitors who come there today are not Jewish? They are non-Jewish Europeans or people from Asian countries who have no direct link to the Holocaust. And yet or World War II. Well, no, they do if they're European to World War II. And yet they are coming to learn about and to make meaning of these very words, Nazism, fascism, Holocaust, and the ways and what's happening at Auschwitz is that the tours not only teaching about the very actual history that happened, but also helping people to make applications to contemporary realities. That is something. There must be a massive public education campaign to continue to preserve and protect and respect the meanings of these terms.
Shana, I'm already over time, but I want to ask you one other question, and if you could answer as briefly as possible, even though it's a terrifically important question. What is most needed to connect as memory and wisdom what happened in the Holocaust and what is happening in our world today?
What is most needed to connect that past with our present today?
Mm-hmm.
I think that what we need is to continue to be, to humanize and to personalize our realities.
Mm.
We live in a global context today, and what's great about that is that we have access to one another around the world, but we don't necessarily touch each other. We're less interactive because we're doing everything through the internet. And we think we know, but we don't really. Our hearts need to be involved now in a way that we may be losing touch, and also because we're bombarded with information. I think we need to be speaking to each other more.
Shana Penn is Executive Director of the Toby Foundation for Jewish Life and Culture. Instrumental in many important international projects, she developed and directs the Toby Foundation's Jewish Heritage Initiative with a long list of initiatives, including the Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. Shana is the author of the book Solidarity's Secret: The Women Who Defeated Communism in Poland, and she's a scholar in residence at the Graduate Theological Union Center for Jewish Studies in Berkeley. Ms. Penn, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing with us not only your memories, but the experience you had just in recent days. To listen to you and to know the content and subject matter of which you speak makes me feel a little bit like Moses hearing something that made him want to take off his shoes and say, "This is holy ground." Ms. Penn, thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate the occasion.